In today's video, I'm going to walk through what not to do when you're desperate for a tenant to move into one of your investment properties. Having a tenant move out, break lease, or not renew the lease is simply just property investing. And yes, sometimes the vacancy can be longer than you would have wanted. So quickly before we get into that, a bit about me. So I manage hundreds of properties on a daily basis with the help of a fantastic team. Located in Emerald, Queensland. I'm born and raised here, been here my entire life. I entered the real estate industry at 18 years old. I had the goal to get into sales. However, I fell in love with property management and I have not looked back ever since. So, this is what not to do. I'm a big believer that tenant selection should not be a admin role, or it should be an admin process. It is risk management. Having a wrong tenant in your property will destroy your cash flow, your asset, because they'll leave it unclean and there'll be numerous damages. Your time, you'll have to deal with more emails and phone calls with your property manager, and most importantly, your well-being. If you know you have a tenant that is constantly in rent arrears or causing damage to the property, you're going to be worrying about it more than you should. So it's important right from the start to look at tenant selection as risk management. Don't simply just approve a tenant. Make sure you have all the details on paper and know that all the background checks on the tenant have actually been checked and come back clean, because that will help on ensuring you don't put a tenant you don't want in your property. And what I see here, the reason why poor tenants normally get accepted into properties is when an investor is desperate. At that time, then when the property is vacant, funds will be tight. You'll be trying to pay your mortgage, pay other mortgages with your other properties, and also do maintenance after the tenant has moved out, and all the while knowing that you will not have rental income for that week. Naturally, we want to get somebody in ASAP, but thinking long term, if you do get somebody in now to pay the rent and they're not a quality tenant, then in 6 months' time you'll have the same issue and you'll have more costs. One of the main problems with bad tenants is that they are always in rental arrears. Having late rent equals missed mortgage payments and large amounts of stress because you're trying to move funds around to pay your mortgage. What I think people don't really understand is that, say for example, the agency will disperse funds on the last day of the month, which is the 30th. Now, if the tenant's in 6 days rent arrears on the 30th and they pay rent 2 days later, which is in the next month, you won't receive any rental income on that 30th. So because the tenant is in rent arrears, although they have technically resolved it, it still causes you stress because you don't have funds, unless the agency does a special disbursement, you don't have funds to pay your mortgage for that time. So let's look at this scenario. Jim is a tenant and he falls into rent arrears. Despite the property manager's best efforts, Jim is refusing to pay rent and he is breached for the rental arrears. Then Jim still refuses to pay rent. Then Jim sent a notice to leave, giving Jim 7 days to vacate the property. Jim leaves the property in a mess. The property needs to be cleaned. Rubbish has to be removed. The bond that, of course, will be claimed probably won't cover all rent, all cleaning, and all rubbish removal. So this scenario is the investor's nightmare and will wipe out months of profits and any emergency buffers you have, meaning you will have to build back up for the next 6 to 12 months. It is extremely high risk accepting poor quality tenants. And it's that simple, yet when the property is vacant, people tend to forget this key when sourcing tenants. Another issue with sourcing the incorrect tenants or poor quality tenants is that they treat your asset like a disposable rental, like it's something they can buy and then throw away. They don't treat it like their own home, not like your investment, and certainly not like your retirement plan. When a property manager sends a routine inspection through, look for these things to tell if you have a bad tenant. Are there holes in walls? If so, that is an indication that something is going on at the property that is abnormal. Is there excessive pet damage? Hey, I get it. Some cats will scratch the fly screen. I've seen it happen numerous times. Most tenants will just fix that up. But if there's large pet damage or pets inside the property when they shouldn't be causing damage, that means the tenant isn't listening to your request or the property manager at all. Also, look out for if the property manager noted an unreported leak at the property that the tenant has never reported. While you may ask, well, that's the property manager's job. Yes, 100%. It is their job to pick up leaks at the property, but it shows that the tenant is not advocating for looking after your rental. They simply don't care if there's a leaking tap. Then, property is unclean. That's pretty self-explanatory. And are there any attempted break-ins and broken fixtures? Of course, I've seen some of the best tenants be broken into, unfortunately, but 8 times out of 10, there's something else going on behind the scenes. But if there's 2 break-ins, well, then that's a concern. You need to be looking at that a little bit deeper. And then don't forget, the costs for repairs are not all the costs. So when you're doing repairs, after the tenant vacates because you didn't renew their lease, then you have to spend probably 1 to 3 weeks of vacancies while you resolve any damages and catch up on any maintenance. These costs compound so quickly, so it's important to, if you do end up having a bad tenant, to move super quickly and look to move them on to a property that will suit them better. Now, one of the biggest costs is often intangible. This is your time and mental energy. Property investors, well, all the property investors I speak to want to have less stress on their plate when dealing with these properties. And that's my goal, to make sure we take away as much stress and decision making from the property investor as possible, so then they can have a stress-free property investment journey. But when there is a difficult tenant at the property, expect additional emails from your property manager keeping you up to date on the situation, additional phone calls discussing this. Obviously, you may not be across the entire legislation and you may have a few questions, asking your property manager, going back and forth, confirming what is legal, what isn't, what can be done, what can't be done. So you're going to constantly be stressed and on edge. So after speaking to quite a few investors that we have dealt, unfortunately, with these situations, with poor tenants and difficult tenancy situations, investors have said to me that there's lots more stress out of work, struggling to sleep at night. These type of things I hate to see, and it is almost inevitable when you do have a very difficult tenant that you're currently resolving that situation. That situation can drag out numerous months depending on how you proceed and how you go about it. But if you go through QCAT or court in general, it can take quite a few weeks or even months to finalize the entire tenancy. Discussing QCAT. Sometimes, once we exhaust all options and tactics that you or us as a property manager have, the next step and the most necessary step is tribunal, which is in our state, Queensland, is called QCAT. If the tenant is refusing to leave, evictions are slow, they'll be costly and emotionally draining. Again, emotionally draining is not tangible, but it is one of the most frustrating things investors have to deal with when they're going through a QCAT case. Evictions in general are not a pleasant sight to see and to deal with, but it is a necessary thing that property managers do have to deal with from time to time. You will be charged an application fee from the court, and it can range from $100 to $200. And due to the legal system, even if you win, if you're discussing a bond claim and disputing on how much bond you should receive, you may not achieve everything you desired for, because in the end it is up to the magistrate. So I always like to use this as a last resort, a necessary resort of course, but we want to make sure, if possible, we can resolve the issue without going to tribunal, because once you go to court, no party wins. Now, you may say, how do I stop all this from happening? This sounds terrible. And yes, it is terrible, and I don't like to deal with it either. So what we do, and what you can do, is be super thorough when sourcing a new tenant. That being said, sourcing a great tenant is never a guarantee. but you can certainly make sure the odds of accepting a great tenant are in your favor. If you screen a tenant thoroughly and very, very well, you're going to prevent 90% of problems with that tenant. That starts from showing them through the property in person to the pre-tenancy meeting with the tenant before they pick up keys. There's a lot in there to make sure the tenant has a great outcome and make sure we source a good tenant. When you are looking at approving an application, make sure that their previous rental reference has been checked, their employment reference, how long have they been working there, what's the rent to income ratio, how many dependents. These all play key factors in getting an idea for that application. If they do have rental history, that is fantastic. Make sure the property manager has a copy of the ledger and has confirmed that there are no rent arrears previously. Or if there are they very little? Is that something you want to look over for the time being? Up to you. Check that their income has been verified. We have had applicants submit payslips 2 months old, and if you don't look at that date, you'll be, oh, it's fantastic. Their rent to income ratio is below 30%, happy days. Little did we know that that person was fired 2 months ago. So if we didn't pick that up, we would have put somebody that was into that property that had no job at that moment, which is a disaster waiting to happen. One key takeaway from this video is 3 rules when accepting applications. Never accept pressure applications. If a property manager or a tenant is constantly calling or they're constantly bugging you to accept an application, a very specific application, never accept it. Because when you make a decision under pressure, it is not going to be the best decision. Second, never accept an application when there is incomplete information. If we're still waiting on a rental reference or an employment reference, don't accept it, because that employment reference could determine your decision. The last one, never accept pity applications. While I am all for helping out people as much as possible, we ourselves deal with Rent Connect and Department of Housing. There's a lot of other people that have been through a lot, and we can help them find some homes with rent assistance. That being said, we never accept, we're not a charity, you're not a charity, so we never accept PD applications. While it can seem nice at the time, you're going to probably regret it down the track. The main takeaway from this video is to make sure that you prevent sourcing a poor tenant at the beginning to make sure you don't deal with these issues later. And vice versa, make sure you treat the tenant well during their time at your property. It is their home while they live there, so make sure you give them privacy, you action maintenance, and it can be a win-win-win for everybody.